What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Gage. Welcome to the channel. I am back. It has been a while since I last uploaded. I am very excited to be able to come back to uploading to YouTube by posting an updated deck profile to one of my favorite decks, the Phantom Knights. I'm excited to get into it, but before I do, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and it helps motivate me to continue to create content like this. I fully intend on creating more deck profiles for Yu-Gi-Oh!, One Piece, Digimon, pretty much all my favorite trading card games. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and hop right into it. So, since this is a Phantom Knights deck profile, of course, I am playing 3 copies of the Phantom Knights of Torn Scales, the most busted card in the deck for sure. He is able to discard a card for cost, by the way, to be able to send a Phantom Knights card from the deck to your graveyard. So he is an excellent starter because that discarding for cost is very imperative because the Phantom Knights are all about the graveyard, right? They're phantom cards. So their whole shtick is that they want to be able to get into the graveyard so that they can combo and extend. And by being able to discard a card for cost, it means that you are able to guarantee that you're able to help set up the graveyard that much easier. So even if he is hit with an Ash Blossom or an Imperm, the fact that you are able to discard a card means that you probably already have a very pivotal card in the grave that you need to be able to continue making plays. So, of course, if you're playing the Phantom Knights, you have to play him. And, of course, his brother in arms, the Phantom Knights of Silent Boots. Easily one of the best cards in the deck as well, just because of his ability to freely special summon himself if you control a Phantom Knight. And, of course, he's able to banish himself from the graveyard in order to search you for a Phantom Knight spell or trap. So this is very important because it means you are able to get into your Fog Blade, which is an interruption on your opponent's turn, but it's also the way that you're able to get into your rank up spell. So I do play the Dark Xyz package, and so the fact that I'm able to consistently get access to that field spell is what really drives me to play the deck. Being able to get into the Dark Requiem cards and Dark Rebellion are just very, very strong cards in general because they're really good at going first and going second. And so, yeah, Silent Boots is imperative to not only continuing your combos, you want to get as many level 3s on the field so that you can keep making Link plays and Xyz plays, but he's just a fantastic extender as well. I am playing 2 copies of the Phantom Knights of Ancient Cloak. So this one is able to banish itself from the graveyard to add a Phantom Knight monster from the deck to your hand. So not as useful. He's really just meant to be used as an extender, which is why we only play him at 2 copies. But he's another Phantom Knight's name. So, if he does end up getting discarded off of your Torn Scales, you can then go ahead and send... you can then banish this from the graveyard to go ahead and get your Silent Boots and get your entire play running. So, yeah, he's all right. Definitely not the best one, but you do have to play him. And then, lastly, for the Phantom Knights monsters in the main deck, we are playing the Phantom Knights of Ragged Gloves. So this one is able to banish itself from the graveyard to send a Phantom Knights card from the deck to the graveyard. So this not only includes your monsters, but it does include spell or traps. And the spell and traps are, the traps in particular are useful because they can be used as Monster Reborn. So again, this is not necessarily a starter on itself, but it is an excellent extender and a must-needed card in the deck. So, continuing with extenders, I am playing 3 copies of Kagemusha Knight. So, as I mentioned earlier, you really want to get as many level 3 monsters in play, but it's also important that you have access to dark monsters because you want to be able to get into the Link monster, Rusty Bardiche, which does require a dark monster. I've tried different ratios and have tried other extenders, but I always keep coming back to Kagemusha Knight, mostly because worst case, if you do not have access to another special summon, say you just have this Phantom Knight in your hand, you can go ahead and normal summon it, and then use the Kagemusha Knight, which on a normal summon can special summon itself, and boom, you have access to your Link plays, you have access to Xyz plays, and so that's why I always find myself just coming back to the Kagemusha. I'm also playing the Adventure Package, which we'll talk a little bit more in depth later. So worst case, I can also use the Water Enchantress as a level 3 extender as well by normal summoning the Water Enchantress and then special summoning the Kagemusha Knight. And again, I have access to Link plays and Xyz plays. So Kagemusha Knight is very, very useful in helping to bridge the gap and provide additional extenders that the deck needs. Speaking of extenders, I am playing the Dangers. So the deck is mostly gas. Like, you really want to play as many cards that help you get to level 3 monsters as possible. It does help that they are also dark. We are playing hand traps, which is the unfortunate side effect of playing danger monsters, because you always have the potential to accidentally end up sending one of your hand traps to the graveyard, which isn't always ideal. But the fact is that they are high risk, high reward cards, right? I like being able to play cards that, in worst case scenario, I end up having to, send a hand trap to the graveyard. But just the additional benefit of being able to get a level 3 onto the field and a potential draw or another special summon, it's just too good. So the Dangers are very important to helping extend further. And now to talk about the Adventure Package in this deck. So I am playing 3 copies of Water Enchantress. The thing about the Phantom Knights is that their M board usually is really good at setting up monster effect negation, but not anything that interacts with spells or traps. So the Adventure Package is just perfect at being able to provide that extra layer of protection that this deck very much needs, because being able to have access to the Omni Negate from the Wandering Griffin Rider is just, it makes your M board almost unbreakable. So 3 copies of Water Enchantress, you can banish it from your hand, you can banish it from the graveyard to be able to get access to your Rite of Aramesir. And then, as I mentioned earlier, even if you have to use it as a level 3 monster to help get into Cherubini or another Xyz play, you can also use it for that too. So I've tried other ratios, but it really does just work at having it at 3 copies. So I highly, highly recommend it. I am playing the Wandering Griffin Rider, as I mentioned. This is the monster that is kind of the cherry on top and the reason why we play the Adventure Package, to special summon itself to provide us with an Omni Negate. It's just really, really good. So I highly recommend the Adventure Package. The only thing is that you are forced to play a few bricks, but that is why we play as many extenders as possible, so that no matter what, we always have the opportunity to play. And now for the hand trap portion. As I mentioned, we are playing hand traps, and what the best hand trap to play is obviously just Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Do I have to say more? It is a level 3 monster, so while it can provide interruption on your opponent's turn, you can also, worst case scenario, use it as a level 3 monster that you can use to get into your rank 3 plays. So 3 copies of Ash Blossom, along with 3 copies of Ghost Belle and Haunted Mansion. I think that you're seeing a trend here. I'm really just trying to play as many level 3 monsters as possible. I always like to be able to have cards that have multiple uses, multiple utilities, and the fact that there are certain hand traps that are level 3 just almost works too well for this deck. So 3 copies of Ghost Belle, because it does have application in the current format. However, you can obviously make adjustments depending on, what format you are playing. So if you have a lot of people in your locals that are playing graveyard-related decks, then Ghost Belle is very useful for that. And of course, we are playing 3 copies of Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill. Again, a level 3 monster. You get the point now. We're really just playing the best ones, and having a monster effect negation to be able to interact on your opponent's turn is very useful. So again, I like my level 3 monsters, and if I can also have them double down as hand traps too, then I am happy to utilize them. So to continue with the Adventure Package, I am playing 3 copies of Rite of Aramesir along with the Fateful Adventure. So this gets you access to your Adventure token, which allows your Wandering Griffin Rider to be live for the Omni Negate. But Fateful Adventure is actually really busted because of the fact that when you search for your Griffin Rider, for example, you get to discard a card, which means that you can discard some of your Phantom Knights, and that way you actually are the downside of what's supposed to be the downside for discarding a card actually works to your benefit for the deck, which adds a whole new layer of consistency and reliability for how the deck works. The deck is very, very smooth, and the adventure engine almost feels like it was meant to be used with this deck. So I highly recommend playing these cards. And of course, I'm playing one copy of Reinforcement of the Army. It is a warrior, so it means you can add your missing piece. So if you already have your Torn Scales, you can grab your Silent Boots. If you have your Silent Boots, you can add your Torn Scales. Say you have both, you could grab a Kagemusha Knight. I mean, Reinforcement of the Army is just kind of like your Swiss Army knife to be able to get you whatever missing piece you need. So it works really well with the deck, and I highly recommend it. And as I mentioned, the Silent Boots is able to search for the rank up spell. So this is the spell card that you are able to use to get into the Dark Requiem, the Dark Xyz package. So this is really the only real brick in the deck. But the thing is, it's not that bad to be able to hard open it, because if you do already have, 2 level 3 monsters that you can put on the field, that's usually full combo, in which case you are able to then, if you already have this in your hand, if you do use Silent Boots to search for a trap card, for example, that just means that you can get an extra Fog Blade or something like that. So, yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world, but obviously you would rather search it. So, it's the only true brick in the deck. I'm playing Foolish Burial. It allows you to send a card from the deck to the graveyard. Obviously, we're a graveyard deck, so it is just perfect utility. I am playing the one Dracoback, the Rideable Dragon. This is actually really good discard fodder. Obviously, for the Fateful, it makes it free because it can come back and attach itself to your adventure token. But yeah, I guess I would consider this a brick as well, but the fact that it does have that extra utility where if it is discarded, it could just attach itself to the adventure token, it's really not the worst thing in the world, and you really just want to be able to have really a few cards that are really good being able to go second, and the fact that this is a spell card that also has the ability to bounce a card on your opponent's side of the field back to their hand is also just very powerful. So it's searchable, so I feel like there's no reason why I shouldn't play it. You just want to hope that you can just search it at the end of your combo instead of just drawing into it. I'm also playing Called by the Grave. I really don't want to be hit with any type of hand trap. Obviously, it is going to be detrimental if we get hit with something like a Dimension Shifter. Not going to lie, that's going to end our turn most of the time. There are certain hands in which if you just have nothing but gas and you can get into a lot of monsters, sometimes that could get you there, but you really want to have access to your graveyard. It's not the worst thing in the world. If you get hit with a Nash, you can usually play around it in certain lines, but I'd just rather not have to worry about that at all and just play a card that just prevents my opponent from being able to interact with me in that way. And then into the trap cards, I am playing 3 copies of the Phantom Knights of Fogblade. This is one of the most broken cards in the deck just because it acts as a monster effect negation from your opponent, but it also prevents, you could either target a monster your opponent controls to prevent it from attacking, or target one of your own monsters to prevent monsters from attacking into it. So it is very proactive and reactive. It's something that is very, very useful. For example, if your opponent special summons a Fenrir, you can actually use the Fogblade on its summon to prevent the search and then also prevent it from being able to attack. And obviously Fenrir is very powerful in the fact that, it has the ability to, if it wants to, attack and then trigger its own effect to banish cards you control. And Fogblade essentially just says no to all of that. And so it's searchable. It also allows you to banish itself from the graveyard to special summon a Phantom Knight from your graveyard. Because it's a trap, that means you can do it on your opponent's turn as well. This is easily one of the best extenders in the deck. And that's why I do max it at 3 copies. The thing about the deck is that yes, it can set up a very formidable turn 1 board, if the conditions are right. But what stands out about the deck is its recursion. And it is cards like this that allow the deck to have longevity in the grind game. And I think that's very, very important. The Fogblade, I've tried testing it while just playing 2 copies. And I really just missed always having that 3rd copy for the grind game. So yeah, I do play 3 copies, and worst case, if you do open it, you could either set it or you could discard it off of your Torn Scales and then use it as an extender in the graveyard later. So yep, very powerful card indeed. And then the last card in the main deck is the Phantom Knight's Wing. Again, this one is not as useful as Fogblade, which is why I'm not playing it at more copies, but this does give you a different name so that you can banish itself from the graveyard to special summon another Phantom Knight. So there are instances in which you need multiple ways to Monster Reborn your monsters, so by having access to both of them on the same turn, it's very busted. So that is it for the main deck. Now I'm going to talk about the extra deck. So there's Kaiba as the token for the adventure token. I actually play 2 copies of Cherubini. It is just one of the most busted cards in the deck because it only requires 2 level 3 monsters to go into, and then it sends, for cost, a level 3 monster from the deck to the graveyard. So this is just one of the reasons to play the deck, because it's very hard to interact with this card, and it's versatile. So you could either send a Phantom Knight that you need, you could use it to send a Water Enchantress so that you can banish that and get your adventure package going. It is just a very powerful card, and that is why I play 2 copies of it, because there are going to be instances in which, if it does get into the grind game, you are going to want the second one, and ever since I started playing the second one, I have appreciated it. So 2 copies of Cherubini is the way to go. I am playing 1 copy of the Phantom Knights of Rusty Bardiche. So this is kind of your boss monster. It requires 2 dark monsters. It's a rank 3. And it allows you to send a Phantom Knight's monster from the deck to your graveyard to set a Phantom Knight spell or trap directly from the deck to your spell and trap card zone. So that is very, very powerful, being able to send a Phantom Knight, obviously loading the grave with useful monsters, while also being able to set powerful spells or traps for free, like your Fogblade, or even setting the Phantom Knight's rank up spell. So there are 2 ways to get into it, whether you get into it with the Silent Boots or whether you get into it with this. It really doesn't matter. You just kind of have to see how your plays work out that turn. But Rusty is very important to making that happen. Unfortunately, it does also mean that he usually ends up being like Asher Imperm bait, but that's perfectly okay, because by the time he hits the field, most of the time you already have your graveyard set up. So he's just kind of like the icing on the cake. And then something that a lot of people forget is that if a dark Xyz monster is special summoned to a zone that he points to, he could target a card on the field and destroy it. So that could be a monster, it could be a spell or trap. That is very useful because obviously on your turn, you could use it to pop a monster that your opponent may already have. And on your opponent's turn, you could use the trap to reborn a Dark Xyz monster so that you could special summon it to a zone he points to and pop a card and interrupt their plays. So he's a very good card, and I just recommend being able to play the 1, because very rarely do you have the opportunity to get into a second one, and he's revivable off of the traps anyway, so it's not as if it is hard to get into him. I am also playing the Nightmare Unicorn and IP Masquerena. This is really kind of just a budget alternative to SP Little Knight. If it gets an accessible reprint, I will get it, but this is also serves pretty much a similar purpose, just being able to interrupt your opponent. This is just really good because also the discard can be very useful for this deck in particular, so it's not the worst play in the world. Obviously, I would play SP if I had it, but this package, it's just really good because there are going to be instances in which, if you get debarriered and you don't have access to your Xyz monsters, you're just going to want to have some type of play to go into, and this is the play. So not the greatest play. Obviously, you would prefer to have access to your Xyz monsters since that's what the deck does, but I do appreciate that this deck does have another line of play that you can utilize if you do end up losing access to your Xyz monsters. I'm also playing the Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. There are going to be instances in which you may have some difficulties with certain towers monsters that are unaffected by card effects. So I always just like having pretty much a get out of jail free card in my extra deck that allows me to deal with those pesky monsters that, if your opponent goes all in on a particular monster and you really can't do anything about it because you can't destroy it, you can't target it. Underworld Goddess is pretty much that. So those are it for the Link monsters. And then for the Xyz monsters, I'm playing 2 copies of the Phantom Knights of Breaksword. So busted, just being able to take 2 level 3 monsters. You can detach a material from this card to target a card you control and one card your opponent controls and destroy them. And if it is destroyed by a card effect, you can special summon 2 Phantom Knight monsters from the graveyard, and both of them become level 4s. So that is what really gives you access to those level 4 Dark Xyz monsters, so that you can go ahead and use your rank up spell to get into. So this is just a very powerful card. I've tried it at more copies, but a lot of the time you really don't need it, especially since it is you can reborn it with the traps. So 2 has been working for me. There have been very, very rare instances of which I've needed to go into a 3rd. If it ever gets to that point, it's like you are already in a pretty losing position. So 2 is a pretty good for most of your games. And now for the Dark Xyz package, I am playing the Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon. This is what gives you access to your Dark Requiem play. So you are able to go into this after bringing 2 Phantom Knights back as level 4s. And then you are able to use the rank up spell to rank into the Dark Requiem. So this card is absolutely insane. You are able, when your opponent activates a monster effect, quick effect, you can detach a material to negate the activation and destroy that card. And if you want, you can also reborn a Dark Xyz monster, special summon any one Xyz monster from your graveyard. So that is, it's super busted. This is also not once per turn or once per chain. So usually you are going to have as many as 3 Xyz materials underneath him, which means a ton of interaction in terms of your opponent. Usually your opponent can play through 1, maybe 2 monster effect negations, but 3, while also destroying the card, just kind of seals the deal. So because it only negates monster effects, that is why we are playing the adventure package. And yeah, he's just he's very strong on his own, but when paired with the Wandering Griffin Rider with maybe a Fogblade or 2 set, your board becomes almost unbreakable. And I am also playing the Raiders Knight with the Arc Rebellion Xyz Dragon. If I'm going second and I see an easy line to an OTK, I can use the level 4s that I make from those Phantom Knights that come back as level 4s with the Breaksword effect to go into Raiders Knight, detach a material, go into the Arc Rebellion, and then negate all of your opponent's monster effects, and then gain the attack of every single monster on the field. So your opponent is going to be feeling really silly when they have a bunch of monsters on the field, and you gain like 10,000 attack, and then just swing into their weakest monster, usually for game. So yeah, it's just really nice to be able to have a nice going second option, and the Raiders Knight into Arc Rebellion is the glue that really helps you to close out games. And for additional level 4s, I'm playing the Evil Swarm Nightmare. If it no longer becomes feasible to get into your rank up spell, this is kind of your backup level rank 4. Because when your opponent special summons a monster, you can detach an Xyz material to change that special summon monster to face down defense position. So it is an all right interruption. You can use it. It's not once per turn, so you can potentially get 2 uses out of it, and then hopefully, if this is backed up by maybe some of your traps, you can hopefully make it to the next turn. So this is really just if for whatever reason you are no longer able to get into your Requiem play, you could use your level 4s to make something that is a decent interruption. And then, of course, you're playing a rank 4 deck. You're playing an Xyz deck, right? So you want to make sure that you have access to Downerd Magician along with the Zeus. Worst case scenario, you get into a situation where you're like, all right, well, I'm just going to attack with my Xyz monster, go into Downerd, go into Zeus, and now most of the time you have 2 Zeus activations to be able to just wipe the entire field. And that's pretty okay with you, right? Because even if you end up wiping your own monsters, they're going to the graveyard, which is exactly where they want to be. So the only issue is that if you do go for the Xyz plays with the Breaksword, it does lock you into Darks. So you unfortunately will not be able to go into Zeus if you do have those lines, but very rarely does that matter. So that is pretty much it for the extra deck. I'm just going to quickly go over the side deck. I am playing 2 copies of Lightning Storm along with a Feather Duster just to be able to have mass removal. The deck can really struggle going second in some instances, so you really just want to be able to bait out negations, clear out your opponent's field, and then just be able to play from there. I'm also playing 3 copies of Forbidden Droplet. This is the most busted going second card for this deck in particular, to be able to send any number of cards from the hand or field to be able to choose that many effect monsters your opponent controls and negate them, and they cannot respond with the thing that you send. That's just insane. You're usually sending a bunch of Phantom Knights, loading up your graveyard, and then pretty much nullifying your opponent's entire field. So Forbidden Droplet was made for this deck. And to continue with the blowouts, I'm playing 3 copies of Evenly Matched, just being able to banish your opponent's pretty much their entire field. As the card implies, it then makes you, pretty evenly matched. If your opponent goes first and they don't end up setting some type of negate, then most of the time this is going to end up going through, or at the worst, eating a negate, meaning that you are going to be able to make your plays from there. For going first, I am playing 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. Like I mentioned, our opening board, assuming everything goes well, is pretty much unbreakable. So I really like being able to have access to something that also acts as another form of spell and trap interruption, so that if your opponent tries to go into Evenly Matched or something like that, you could just tell them no. And then last but not least, I am playing 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. This card is an absolute turn ender in some instances. So unfortunately, though it is not level 3, if one of your other hand traps, like say Bell, isn't relevant, but Droll is, which a lot of the cases that may end up being the case, it's an easy swap to just be able to look at some of the hand traps that you have and say, all right, well, what do I think is going to be most important and what could be useful in this particular matchup. So guys, thank you for sticking with me this long. I really appreciate you checking out the deck profile. The deck is really fun. It's been my pet deck for years, and I really just love being able to play decks like these. I've been playing this deck for a long time, and I always feel like there are just new things to learn, new interactions, different plays. And as far as a beginner deck, it's very easy to get into. It's one of those easy to get into but hard to master type of decks. And so if you are, looking for something that is easy to pick up, and you're going to have a lot of fun with it, and you get the access to play, some of these really cool looking cards, I highly recommend the Phantom Knights. So if you have any questions about the deck, or, if you are interested in potentially seeing combos with this deck, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I am very interested in doing videos like that. So thanks again, and see you next time.